Well, thank you for coming. It's great to be here in Yaletown in Vancouver. And this is a place that has changed in the last couple of years. Over 1,000 people have died of drug overdoses in the province of British Columbia this year. And we're faced with the challenge of what to do about it. A lot of effort has gone into it, but it's not enough. It's not good enough. It's not working the way it should. We know that the NDP have decided that harm reduction is the way to go, and that's an element that needs to be followed. But we also need effective treatment and prevention programs. The NDP's approach in this community has been to simply warehouse people who are suffering from addictions. And the unfortunate result is because of that housing approach, problems are spilling onto the streets, and the housing problem is turning into a community problem. We have major issues in this community with street violence, with theft, with property damage, and especially with intimidation. We have stories of small children in strollers being spat upon, of mothers with children being threatened, of seniors being chased down the street. And not far away in Strathcona, they're having to put up a high security fence around the school to protect it from people on the street. This isn't good enough. Community safety is a high priority for government and it needs to be properly addressed. What we're seeing with the NDP is a complete failure to acknowledge that this problem has blown up in the last year with a 21% increase in assaults in Vancouver and a 50% increase in business break-ins. That's not good enough. It's simply not acceptable to have a 21% increase in assaults, a 50% increase in business break-ins right here in a community that was peaceful and serene a year ago. So we're calling for 3 debates with John Horgan to deal with these issues. The first about economic recovery, the second about safety and addictions, and the third about a vision for British Columbia. We're challenging John Horgan and Sonia Furstenau to 3 debates on economic recovery, on safety and addictions, and on a vision for British Columbia. It's time for British Columbians to get straight answers and to get through this fog of dishonesty that John Horgan has created this week. We need to have a government we can trust, and right now that's a major issue in this election, which will only be resolved with open debates, face-to-face, amongst the 3 leaders. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thanks everyone. So we will go to the first question from Binder Sajan from CTV. Go ahead, Binder.
Hi, Andrew. I'm wondering, what conversations have you had with advocates for the homeless recently? When were they? Who were they with? And what did they tell you?
Well, when we speak with the people who are in the business of attempting to house homeless people, they face the same problems again and again. It's an issue of finding appropriate housing. We found 39,000 housing units when we were in office, including multiple units in the downtown east side, spread through Gastown, that provided supportive housing that got people off the streets into a supportable way of life. In my own riding in Dunbar, there's a supported housing unit with about 50 people in it that works really well, and it has for years. But in the last 2 years, the NDP have started warehousing people, and it does not work.
Do you have a follow-up, Binder?
I do. So when was the last time that you spoke to an advocate for the homeless? I mean, I hear you speak a lot about the surrounding community impacts on businesses and residents, yet, you know, the homeless population is like the rest of people. It's a diverse population. You seem to be focusing on like the crime and safety aspects. And I'm wondering, don't you think you're being a bit divisive in that way?
Well, I think we all know that housing is a major issue here in the Lower Mainland. In fact, prices have gone up 5% in the last year when the NDP spent 3 years promising affordable housing. They said they'd build 114,000 housing units. Instead, we got 2,700, and 2,000 of those are temporary. So at this rate, it's going to take 130 years for the NDP housing program to show any fruit. And that's not good enough. People are looking for housing, whether they're low income or whether they're well established. And we've got to work harder to make housing affordable for everybody here in the Lower Mainland.
Great, thanks. So we'll go to next question on the line, which is Rob Shaw from the Vancouver Sun. Go ahead, Rob.
Hi, Andrew. A different topic, the speculation tax. The NDP has put out a comment about your Facebook event where you talked about canceling the speculation tax. I was just listening to it today, you were talking about some type of alternate tax.
There's a truck going by.
Okay, can you
Try it
hear me?
again, Rob?
Just wondering about the speculation tax. Do you plan on canceling that, according to your Facebook Live last night? But you're mentioning a capital gains tax or some sort of paper flipping tax. Could you expand on what you're proposing there?
I didn't hear anything you said, Rob.
Oh, can you hear anything I'm saying now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Speculation tax. You plan on canceling
You're going to have
it?
to turn up the audio. We can't hear it.
Hello?
That's better.
Okay. Still doing the same thing, but the speculation tax, you're planning on canceling it and replacing it with some type of capital gains tax? Can you explain what that is?
What we need in this community in Yaletown, in Vancouver, in the Lower Mainland generally, is a tax on people who flip paper condo contracts before the building's even gone up. This has plagued this community for 10 years, and it's something that needs to be addressed. Instead of actually dealing with it, the NDP introduced a phony speculation tax that doesn't actually address speculation at all. We need to make it more affordable for couples, young people, families entering the housing market to buy a pre-sale contract and know that it's not going to be the subject of speculation. That's what a real speculation tax is about, and that's what we're talking about.
Do you have a follow-up question, Rob?
Do you have any other taxes in mind in the housing? The speculation part of it is one aspect, but is there a capital gains tax from a larger sense for housing on your mind?
We're going to be talking about a complete overhaul of property taxation, because what has happened in this city particularly and around the province is we run into small businesses everywhere who are being driven out of business by property taxation. This is not the goal of property taxation, to make it impossible to run a small business. So it's time for a review of property taxation, because the NDP have layered on 23 new taxes and people are saying they just can't afford to run their small business anymore. That was before COVID came along. And now they have the crushing burden of taxation, which doesn't go away, and they have the problem of much reduced revenue. So this is going to take a complete overview to make sure that we can have viable small business here in British Columbia.
Great, thanks. We will go to the next question. Rob Buffum from CTV Vancouver Island. Go ahead, Rob.
If elected to government, you would eliminate the speculation tax.
Speculation tax with a real speculation tax focused on the flipping of paper condo contracts, which is what really gets in the way of young people getting into the housing market.
Do you have a follow-up, Rob?
I do. I'm just wondering about, with respect to the homeless situation, when you were in Victoria the other day, and I think this morning as well, you've been critical of the NDP's approach of what you've described as warehousing people who are homeless, including, say, at Paul's Motor Inn. The businesses nearby were very upset. The owner of Full Epi. What would be your solution to the problem? It's obviously an extremely complex one, but is there something concrete that you would suggest different than buying hotels and converting them into shelter or housing for the homeless? What would you do?
We've had a successful program under the BC Liberals of taking older accommodation and converting it into supportive housing. They're peppered all through the Lower Mainland, and people don't notice them because they work well. What the NDP have done is take this housing first approach and basically take a beat-up old motel, pay millions of dollars more than the market value, move people in, and provide them with nothing. No supports, no counseling, no way to get off their addictions. And what happens is those folks, unfortunately, are in need. They need help, and they're not getting it from the NDP. And we end up seeing at street level with the kind of turmoil that's happening here in Yaletown, that's happening in the north end of Victoria, that's happening in Chilliwack, Kelowna, Langley, and especially in Strathcona here in Vancouver.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. So next question, we'll go to Katie DeRosa from the Times Colonist. Go ahead, Katie.
Hi, Andrew. I recently spoke with a province-wide advisory committee that represents the Black community, Indigenous people, and people of color. And they said that they invited all three parties to a town hall, and they've only heard back, a virtual town hall, and they've only heard back from the Greens. What is the Liberals doing to engage with people of color, considering the Black Lives Matter protest we saw earlier this year? And what are you doing to give people of color a seat at the table?
Well, we have to be crystal clear about this. Every British Columbia deserves to be treated fairly and respectfully, regardless of where they came from, who their parents are, or their ethnicity. People of color are part of our community and need to be integral and key to it. I'm very pleased to see in our rollout of candidates that we have 8 South Asian candidates so far. We have 4 Chinese Canadian candidates so far. We're getting a very diverse and representative group of people running as candidates in this election. That's a great thing, but much more can be done to make sure that we are a fully inclusive society and that everybody feels respected.
Great, thanks. Do you have a follow-up, Katie?
Yeah. As a follow-up, what would you do specifically around anti-Black racism training for public organizations and also anti-Black education in schools?
I think we all know that the Black Lives Matter movement has crystallized, especially amongst younger people, as an essential issue of 2020. And so we cannot just give this lip service. And it's not just a matter of saying government employees have to go through the kind of training. We have to do this as a society. Everybody has to be very sensitive to the idea that we need to be respectful, inclusive, and engaging, because everybody in our society deserves fair treatment. Everybody deserves respect.
Great, thanks. Next question, we will go to Tanya Fletcher from CBC. Go ahead, Tanya.
Well, hi, Andrew. You keep bringing up the theme of homelessness and crime. We saw it in Victoria and Maple Ridge, as was pointed out already. I live about a block from where you're standing, and I know there are many, many other issues that resonate with voters there, but your strategy is clearly propping up those issues that you're targeting in your main message with homelessness and crime and addiction. So how much of the general voter population do you think that is the main issue for?
Well, this campaign is on day 4 of 33 days, and it's going to be covering many, many issues. We'll be talking about exciting new programs next week. This week, I think we've been struck by the lack of integrity of the Premier, his dishonest approach to talking about funding a hospital in Surrey, his dishonesty in talking about his relationship with the Green Party that triggered this election. And so we've been focusing on the integrity of the Premier on an issue that has been neglected by the NDP, which is the combination of homelessness, addictions, and housing. And that, unfortunately, has turned into an issue of triggering crime in Victoria, Vancouver, and many communities around the province that has been festering and has now come to the forefront. So I make no apologies for standing up for the people who feel intimidated, the people who have been threatened, the people who are feeling uncomfortable in their home. And where we are, Tanya, where you live nearby, we hear numerous stories of people who are selling up and moving out of this area of Vancouver because they do not want to deal with the street-level threats they face on a regular basis.
Do you have a follow-up, Tanya?
Yeah, thanks. So are you saying definitively you think that is the main number one voter issue in this election?
Oh, I think the number one voter issue in this election is clearly what is going to happen with British Columbia's recovery from this pandemic. We'll get through this together. It's going to be hard. There are going to be more deaths, unfortunately. There are going to be more people getting ill. The federal government says we're well into the second wave of this pandemic. The issue in this election is how we recover from the pandemic, how our tourism industry can survive, how people can look forward to getting a good job and maintaining their way of life. That's the number one issue. And sadly, the economic recovery plan put forward by the NDP a week ago did nothing meaningful to address those issues.
Great, thank you. We'll go to the next question from Ian Bailey with the Globe and Mail. Go ahead, Ian.
Mr. Wilkinson, you've mentioned the prospect or the suggestion of 3 debates. What can you tell us about where things stand on debates? Is the NDP balking at 3 debates? Are you close to some sort of consensus on how the debates are going to work out? And how will debates look during a pandemic?
The normal arrangement is that the parties approach the media consortium and they arrange for a debate, and it rolls out in a way that's well structured and well managed. This time around, we don't have the opportunity to have large groups of people. We don't have the interchange. We don't have the level of information that people deserve. So we have said, get the information in front of the people of British Columbia. Let people decide for themselves. Let's have 3 debates to get the truth on the table. Because so far in this election, we've seen an awful lot of evasions and dishonesty from John Horgan, and people deserve to have that exposed on TV, live, face-to-face with the 3 leaders. I've been saying that we need 3 debates, and we need 3 debates on economic recovery, on safety and addictions, and on a vision for British Columbia, a way forward. Once we get through this pandemic, we want to know where we're going and what the parties are offering.
Do you have a follow-up, Ian?
Yeah, sure. Has the NDP agreed to 3 debates? And also, are you prepared to have a debate in studio, or would you prefer to be debating from another venue for reasons of public health safety?
I think the only right way to do this is in studio, face-to-face, with the appropriate social distancing, like we're doing at every one of these news conferences. That's the way to get the energy in the room. That's the way to get the truth on the table. And that's what the people of British Columbia deserve in terms of information in this election.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ian. We'll go to the next question. Amy Smart from the Canadian Press. Go ahead, Amy.
Hi, Andrew. I heard you say earlier, you talked about housing in the downtown east side. Is that where you think that housing splits should be concentrated?
Well, I think this is an issue that we're going to face as a society. I said earlier in my own riding in Dunbar, there's a supported housing facility with about 50 people living there. It works. It's a welcome part of our neighborhood. We've got to make it possible for people who are facing either disabilities or people with drug addiction or people who are just down on their luck to be part of our society. And that's going to be a big challenge, but we face this all across British Columbia, and it's simply not acceptable to say they should all go to one location and be bundled together there. There's a lot of work to be done in addressing addictions, making it possible for people to get off drugs. That's a core function of government, but it's also a core function of government to make sure that homeless people have that sense of hope, so that when I go for my walk in the morning and go through a park near my house and see 2 or 3 license plates from outside of BC, people living in motorhomes because they're down on their luck, those are the kind of people that need rental supports to get settled, to get a permanent address. They don't need an elaborate program, they just need a helping hand to get on with life. So there's a full spectrum that we've got to address in terms of dealing with homelessness.
Do you have a follow-up, Amy?
Yeah, you talked about a lack of wraparound supports. What are you hearing from the homeless people or people dealing with homelessness about what they need?
Well, what we've seen is a few success stories. There's one story in Victoria at 844 Johnson Street, which actually works fairly well because they've got enough people there that it warrants having clinical services like nurses available, like visiting doctors, people who can help people to get on a better pathway to get off addictions. Because if it's your sister, your mother, your daughter, you don't want to consign them to a lifetime of addictions using injectable drugs for the rest of their life. People want hope. They want inspiration. They want a goal. And getting people off drugs is a great goal.
Great, thanks. We've got time for 2 more questions. I see I've got Binder Sajan from CTV again. Binder, do you have another question?
I do. I'm still trying to get an answer, Andrew, to know if you've spoken to advocates for the homeless in the last month or 2 and who they are.
I have not spoken to homeless advocates in the last month because we've been getting ready for this election, which apparently has been dumped upon us by the Premier. So what we need to focus on in housing has not changed in the last month. We've got thousands of people in this province who are looking for a place to live. Some of them have some issues in their lives that need to be addressed along with housing. Others are just down on their luck and need a helping hand to get ahead. We need to have a full spectrum of the approach to housing, just like we did in the Liberal era when we put together housing projects that were supportive of people who needed help, and other housing projects that were as simple as providing them with a subsidy for their rent so they could get on with their lives. It's a full spectrum of housing and services that are needed, and it's going to be essential to deliver it in the near future.
Great, thank you. So we will go to our last question today, and that is Ted Ford from Victoria Buzz. Go ahead, Ted.
Oh, thanks very much. Just for clarification, it's Tim Ford. But thanks very much for taking my question, sir. I just wanted to follow up on the conversation we're having here about overdoses. the NDP has said that the federal government should be decriminalizing most criminalized substances. Would you also support a policy like that?
You have to recognize that the criminal code elements of the control of narcotic drugs are purely federal jurisdiction. It's fine to talk about decriminalizing, but that actually doesn't do anything to get people off drugs. It doesn't do anything to treat their addictions. It just changes whether they're subject to criminal consequences. And let's be completely clear. Drug addiction is a disease. It's a medical disorder. I know this from my own clinical experience. Let's treat addiction as a medical issue, not as a criminal issue, and we'll make progress much quicker than the other way around.
Do you have a follow-up? Do you have a follow-up, Tim?
Yes, thanks very much. Earlier you mentioned that the number one issue for this election is going to be recovering from COVID. Specifically, you mentioned the tourism industry. In Victoria in particular, we've seen a big impact from a loss of cruise ships and the 800,000 estimated people that come with it. How would you address that gap of commercial activity?
I think in places like Victoria and up on north end of Vancouver Island, we've seen the devastating effect of COVID on the tourism industry. Empty hotels, souvenir stores putting everything up for sale. Local people have done a great job of doing staycations in British Columbia, but it doesn't fill in the gap. As we know, local tourists spend less than international tourists. So we're going to have thousands of tourism industries at risk of going broke. And they are completely viable, strong, capable operators who just need a helping hand to get through the next season. If there's a vaccine in the spring, we're going to see tourism come roaring back. And we can't find ourselves in a situation where thousands of tourism operators and attractions have shut down permanently because they couldn't make it through the winter. That's what the tourism industry asked for. That's what they were looking forward into the economic recovery plan. And they got a consultation process that's going to take months and months from the NDP. So to be clear, our tourism industry needs a helping hand to make sure it survives into the next good tourist season. And the NDP have failed to do that.
Great. Thanks, everyone. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks again.
Thank you.